Hey, what's up? It's Kato, and we today are doing a track guide of Bahrain. Coming into turn 1, you want to break around the 120 meters down to first, double upshift to third at the apex, then to fourth, then to fifth before that turn 2 curb. Try to lift as little as possible. As you can see, we're now gaining time all the way up. Coming into turn 3 here, you're going to want to use as much curb as possible on the entry, down to third, hold it there for a bit, then up to fourth, use the curb on the exit. Coming into the twisty section now, keep tight to the left, then flick right, carry as much speed as possible, then left again. Avoid those curves if possible. Braking now, down to first gear, double upshift to third, use the throttle to rotate the car. And there we go, we got a pretty okay exit there, not losing time, not gaining time. Coming into turn 9 and 10, tricky trail brake section here, down to first gear, double upshift to third, try and focus on a good exit, avoid those curves if possible. We rode it a little bit, we lost about half a tenth there, unfortunately. Now, coming into turn 11, you're going to shift down to fourth gear, then quickly shift up to fifth gear, try and be as brave with the throttle as possible. Middle of the track, try and stay tight to the right, then come out, take the curb on the entry, down to third gear, up to fourth, watch the track limit on the exit there. I played that a little cautious because I didn't want to invalidate this lap. It took a long time to get here, but now coming into the final corner, braking on the curb, down to third gear, up to fourth, focus on the exit, try not to spin, be really careful with that throttle application, just be as smooth as possible, and coming across the line now, we have a 124.978. Alright, and now we're moving on to a bit of the slower section of the video where I go corner by corner and really break down where you can gain time, where you can lose time. And hopefully that'll help out. So coming into turn 1, braking at about the 120 meters, right about there, in between 100 and 150. You could probably brake later than this, but I lost some time there. And it turned out pretty well because I actually took the corner very nicely, but it could have been an extra like 100th I would have gained. Nothing too important. So now coming into the braking zone, at the apex, double shift up to third as soon as I start putting that throttle on. And I like to give it a lot of throttle just to help the rotation a bit. Straighten the car up as soon as possible. And once you do, full throttle in third gear, upshift to fourth then to make sure that third gear doesn't spin you out. And then once again, once you start turning in, up to fifth gear before you get to that curb. I lift a little bit here, as you can see, coming up to the curb, because if you don't, it can kind of throw you off, make it a bit unstable. Other times, though, it's really just a 50-50 whether or not you'll be able to take it fine or it'll just throw you. So you can really cut the corner a whole lot if you want to. I don't prefer to do that, just so that I don't spin. But yeah, so coming into the exit now, you're going to want to ride the curb. Fifth gear, we're full throttle at this point. We're full throttle about right here, yeah. Ride the curb here. You kind of got to commit if you're going to ride this curb. Because as you can see, there's a little bit of a divot here. So if your tire gets caught there, you'll just spin. And then I just stay tight to the right-hand side, and that'll gain you like maybe 100th. It's nothing major, but it's not 100th. Yeah, an 100th. I don't know what I'm talking about. So it's not major, but you can do it if you want. Coming up to turn 3 now, braking right about here, just after the 100-meter board. Later than what the line suggests, but not too late. So now trail braking all the way up until the apex, down to third gear. You're going to want to avoid hitting this curb. Oh, I also should have mentioned in turn 1, you're going to want to avoid hitting that curb as well. That can really unsettle the car, and losing traction in that turn 1 and 2 sequence can lose you a ton of time, even though it might not seem like it. So just being very careful on the throttle in turns 1 and 2 and avoiding that turn 1 curb, that'll set you up pretty well. But coming into the turn 3 curb now, you're also going to want to avoid this one. I hit it here, and that loses us a good amount of time. We're up about 800ths now, but that's all going to go because we hit that curb, got some understeer, and we had to sacrifice our exit a bit. But as you can see, I short shifted to fourth, and then just basically ride this curb on the exit. And then coming into this twisty section, it can be really tricky. I am actually not very consistent here, but you're going to want to take this curb on the left, take it maybe even a bit more than I did, because you really won't lose that much time by riding on this curb. It's very flat. But then you're going to want to brake. You're going to want to brake earlier than the racing line suggests, which is shocking, and just flick it right as soon as that happens. This curb can be very deadly, or it can just do nothing at all. There's a little bit of that divot at the end there, so if you put your tire over the curb and you try and come back on, you'll just get so much understeer, the car will just not turn at all. But as long as you keep your tire on the inside of this curb, you should be just fine. Try and carry as much speed as possible. Now coming up to this, here you're going to want to flick left. I flick left way too early. Um, that's because I should have been more to the right, just a bit more to the right, and that gives you such a better line coming through here. You really don't lose. You really should be full throttle throughout this entire section, but I have to lift now because I'm coming up to the curb. As you can see, I lift a little bit. If you don't end up lifting and you ride the curb, the curb will just throw you. It's over from there. Avoid this curve on the exit too. If you go too wide, you can run on this first inside one, but if you go over one more, your lap is over. Your tire just gets caught in that little divot, and it'll just spin you. So now I get as close to the left-hand side as possible before coming into this braking zone. You can brake on the curb if you'd like. You can even put a tire over it and you'd be just fine. I don't in this case. I haven't really tried it, but I've seen it work for people who are quicker than I am, so might be worth a shot. You can brake pretty late coming into this zone. It's quite deceptive. The racing line wants you to brake really early, but you don't have to brake as late as it suggests. As long as you just nail your trail braking, you should be fine. And we up to apex, down to first gear, and then double upshift to third as soon as I start putting the throttle on. And as you can see, I put a good amount of throttle here at the start, just because I'm kind of forcing the understeer a little bit, just that I can really focus on that rotation. But as you can see, I quickly correct it, and then I just really don't give it a whole lot of steering input after that, and the car rotates very smoothly. And as you can see throughout this whole sequence here, if the player wants to not freeze like this, that'd be lovely. But basically what I was trying to say, if this wants to play, is that I was very, very smooth on the throttle. Let's try this. Okay, yeah, here you go. So as you can see, very, very very smooth with the throttle application, just putting more and more on as it goes on. As you can see, just more and more and more. Very consistent application. I don't just slam it once I get the car straight. You're also going to want to avoid this curb on the exit. I touched a little bit. That maybe loses me a bit of time and it compromises my exit a bit. But this curb will just spin you. It has zero grip at all. It'll just give you a terrible exit coming out of here. So now coming up to turn 9 and 10, very tricky braking zone. I stay right, then come up left here, hit the apex, then downshift, trail brake all the way to first gear. Now here I make quite a big error. It loses me about half a tenth. You're going to want to avoid this inside curb if possible and maybe come in for a bit later of an apex. But what ends up happening is I hit this curb, I get a bit of understeer because of that, and I go wide into the outside curb over here. So I hit the curb, it unsettles the car. I don't get all the rotation I'd like. I'm trying to turn the car, but it just won't turn as nice as I want. As nice as I want. I double upshift to third here. And as soon as I put a tire on this, I have to be very careful on the throttle. Normally at this point, if you get the car straight in third gear and you're all the way on the road, you can floor it and it'll give you solid traction. But at this point, I have to be very smooth as I'm on that curve. And as you can see here, or just over a tenth up, and that's going to diminish all the way down to about half a tenth. So very unfortunate, but that just shows there is time in this lap still. Coming into turn 11, braking about right here in between the 50 and the 100 meter board. I go down to fourth. Other people like to keep it at fifth. It doesn't really make a huge difference. I just like the torque that fourth gives you. But either way can be just as quick as the other. But you're going to want to short shift up to fifth pretty quickly here. Otherwise, if you're being as brave as I am on the throttle, the car will just spin. And you might even notice here, I am putting a lot of steering input right now, and that causes me to lose a bit of traction at the rear end. So I kind of have to straighten out and then catch it again. But it ends up working out. I don't lose a whole lot of time because of that, thankfully. But you don't need as much steering input as I just put in right there. And then coming up to this part, it doesn't really matter where on the track you are, honestly. If you're staying tight to the left-hand side, you'll gain time coming through this right-hander. But if you're on this right-hand side, you'll have gained time out of turn 11 just because you'll be going much quicker, but you'll have to scrub some speed. So it doesn't really matter where you end up. Just make sure that wherever you are, just be as smooth as you can with this steering input. Try not to scrub off any speed. This curb will just absolutely murder you, so do not touch that thing. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you can graze it and it won't do much, but just if you go a little bit too much on there, it's a little raised, so the ground effect from the car just disappears and you just go flying. So Now coming up to these final corners, braking on the curb, about where the line suggests. I turn in maybe a little early here. I don't think it makes a huge difference, but I go down all the way to third, and then I on this corner am very cautious because I just don't want to invalidate on this exit right here. It's very easy to do that, but I could have been a bit more brave with the throttle. Like I could have been going full throttle at this point, but because of that, you'll see I end up losing time, and there's still room on this track to get a little bit wider. You really want to try and focus on taking as much curb on the exit here, but not enough to invalidate your lap. It's very sketchy, especially at the end of a good lap. If you're coming up this corner, you're up like 2 or 3 tenths. It's really hard mentally to not just take it easy. So as you can see, losing time down this whole back straight. Now coming up to the final corner, at this point in the lap, this corner is a very nice last corner because it's not super tricky. So I just take all the curb on the entry, brake all the way down to third gear. You're gonna want to avoid this curb. If you hit it, it can unstable the car, give you a bit of understeer. I end up hitting it in this lap, which is not good. And yeah, so just don't do that. It can cost you a bit of traction on the exit. But you're also gonna want to avoid this long strip right here at the exit of this last corner. Because accelerating on here just gives you very inconsistent traction. It can easily spin your car, and accelerating on curbs in this game is just very tricky in general. It just, for some reason, just makes your car much slower on that exit. And that's what I ended up doing on my 125.1 lap. So as you can see here on this exit, I'll be gaining a lot of time coming up to the line, gain about 300ths of a second. And we cross the line for a 124.978. So I'm quite happy with that lap. But now we're just going to take a quick look at the setup. We got 1.7 wings. If it was just this, you'd have zero rotation at all. But as you can see, when we get to the suspension geometry, that's where we get most of our rotation from. Transmission settings, nothing special, 50, 55. Or not suspension geometry, suspension is where we get most of our rotation. The camber here is kind of interesting. I didn't really fiddle with it too much. I was happy with the balance that this had, so yeah, it worked out pretty well for me. And then going into the suspension settings, as you can see, this is quite aggressive. 1.5 on the rear suspension, 1.8 on the roll bars. That is just generates a ton of rotation. But with those 1.7 wings, and that rear wing is very high. You should also be quite quick in a straight line with the 1.7 wings. That's quicker than other setups around here. But this gives you a lot of rotation. This 1.3 ride height can be a bit unstable over curbs, but as long as you don't ride the ones that I told you, you should be fine. Now coming up to the brakes, it's nothing special, just 150. Tire pressures, lower than the normal, just because normal feels really high in this game. The traction is nice. So yeah, 22.2 on the fronts and then 20.7 on the rears. And yeah, so that'll be it for this track guide. It was quite fun making this, so I'll probably end up making it next week too. So yeah, I'll see you guys later.